Drafting from the 105 at Underdog Fantasy in the little board. That's what we're talking about today on RotoViz OT. We're not talking about it, Shawn. We are doing it as things happen. We are in the spot 105 as we get ready to make those selections. It is 20 rounds. It is $10,000 to first place, a $3 entry fee. So not the high stakes, but the high prize money is there. $10,000 is nothing to be sniffed at in these situations. It is 65% full. It is the Underdog little board. Shawn, as always, if anyone's signing up to an Underdog account, they can use the code RotoViz to get a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100. We talked a little bit in that last show about where our preference would be for our first selection. I mentioned maybe a little bit further back, but the 105 is an interesting spot. But we mentioned it's a little bit flat at that point. Well, surprises here. Christian McCaffrey goes at 101. So maybe, Shawn, we see somebody slide back that shouldn't slide back in Justin Jefferson or Chase. I don't think that happens, but let's hope some running backs come off the board here and we could see. But how are you feeling about the 105 and who are you expecting that to be? Obviously, it's a Tyreek Hill range, it's a Cup range, a Diggs range. AJ Brown could be in play, but Travis Kelce then the non-wide receiver that's in the mix here. And how surprised are you at the CMC at 101?
You're never surprised when the best weapon in all of fantasy football goes 101. Obviously, in a half PPR, there are advantages to the running backs that you don't get in full PPR. At the same time, McCaffrey specifically is going to lose a little bit of his value relative to, perhaps a Jonathan Taylor type of back, a Derrick Henry type of back in this format. But if Christian McCaffrey has a McCaffrey type season, then people are going to be looking back and saying, folks who got McCaffrey at 103, they were the real winners. Folks who reached for him at 101, they're right there in the mix to win the overall prizes. So not surprised, and also not surprised that Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase go 2 and 3.
Yeah, not surprised. Thought they'd go 1 and 2, but the top three, as you would expect. Shawn, it's going to be interesting here as we are on the clock. Cooper Kupp goes off the board. He was somebody I was interested in. Hill is probably my next preference. You mentioned some potential concerns around Diggs. Who are you feeling here at this particular point? Are you going deep down the board or are you going with Tyreek Hill here?
No, I think this has to be Hill or Travis Kelce. It sounds like you are on Hill. One of the ways that I really like to play this is with a Jalen Waddle, a way to play that Miami offense that isn't quite as expensive. And I think that 2023 could be, and perhaps we should even think that it will be, the year that Hill and Waddle flip. One of the things that Ben and I talked about at length on one of our last Stealing Bananas shows was that Waddle had this amazing season and really left a lot of catches on the table, which then means you left a lot of yards on the table. That's a little bit of a concern. If you have a quarterback at any point go away from him because he's not trusted to make a contested catch or to come through at the big moment. He had some huge drops in the wild card game that they very well could have won and sprung the massive upset despite the disparity in quarterback play if he makes those catches. But Jalen Waddle's not going anywhere. His target volume, it's not going anywhere unless somehow these drops get even much more extreme. And that means if he has a season where, whether it's because he makes some mild improvements or it's just random, which could very easily be the case, and he catches a higher percentage of balls, with Jalen Waddle, any particular catch could go for an 80-yard touchdown. His upside is to finish as the wide receiver 1. So that's a great way to play it. And yet, if you're sitting there right in the spot where Tyreek Hill is the value, I think you're going to draft a few of those teams.
Yeah, and you mentioned as the board has gone along, obviously AJ Brown goes off the board, but CeeDee Lamb is the 110, Jonathan Taylor the 111, Amon-Ra St. Brown 112, Jalen Waddle the 13th pick off the board at the 201, the drafter out of the 12th spot there going with Brown and Waddle. I would have been interested to see if Waddle had to slip back to us, but one of the reasons, Shawn, we were talking about on the show earlier this week on Monday that I was interested in, and you kind of, I think, hinted at a little bit, was the possibility of getting one of those wide receiver ones and then being able to have the option of either Garrett Wilson, Austin Ekeler's there, Saquon Barkley's there. There is a lot of interesting options in this range still. So we are picking in 4 selections and you're adding players to our queue here, but there are a lot of options outside of really quarterback here that I would be interested in seeing what we can do. So Wilson goes off the board, but kind of a reverse hero RB kind of strategy, Shawn, feels like in that selection, where we picked could be very, very interesting as Barkley goes off the board. One pick to us, we'll see if that is an option. Breece Hall is somebody you've added further down the board. I've noticed that you haven't added Ken Walker or Devontae Smith to the queue. We might talk about that. They're both guys that we have really liked last year in particular. But Austin Ekeler, Shawn, is available. We don't know what's going to happen with his contract, but one thing I'm pretty confident is that he's going to be playing in the NFL this season and being quite productive about it. How do you feel about him? Next option would be T. Higgins.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting almost a full round of value here, and it's possible, obviously, that he continues to fall down the board in some of these drafts. It's possible that he goes somewhere that is less favorable than the Chargers. It's possible he stays with the Chargers in a far less favorable situation. One of the things that they've talked about is to try and get a little bit more vertical on offense, to try and get more power running on offense. Both of those things could potentially harm his workload. But as you mentioned, what are we sure about? One, that Austin Ekeler is going to be in the NFL next year, and two, that he's going to be one of the 3 or 4 best running backs in the NFL.
He's pretty good.
You're willing to bet on his abilities, and you're willing to bet on the volume being there. I mean, because one of the things that we start with Ekeler is that he hasn't been the early down runner that you see from a Christian McCaffrey, that you saw from a Jamal Charles. And yet his ability to impact an offense, his ability to score from distance like an Aaron Jones. I mean, Ekeler has been the guy over the last several years. To get him at pick 20, frankly, it's just a little bit absurd. He's one of those guys where early in the first round last year, we had some questions about what the risk reward was. And the reward turned out to be absolutely fantastic. Obviously, we talked in the previous show about it's better to be a year early as opposed to a year late in getting out on the older players. But at the same time, that if you're getting extreme discounts where you have so much reward at that point, you want to go ahead and do that. And one of the things too with Ekeler here as the second pick at such a discount is that it creates so much flexibility now for you to draft the rest of the way. Now, again, this draft has been pretty wide receiver heavy, and so it's just very easy in Underdog to get wiped out at receiver and think that you're going to be able to do things that you're not able to actually do. But starting Tyreek Hill, Austin Ekeler, I mean, now we're almost playing with house money. And again, this is a $3 draft. So anybody who is interested in getting some practice in and having the chance to win $10,000 for just $3, I mean, there are going to be a lot of entrants in the tournament. You want to keep that in mind. Don't spend money that you don't have. But Colm, we're going to have a lot of fun here for just $3.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying how things have kicked off. I did mention Kenneth Walker and Devontae Smith. We are just 2 picks away. We have Breece Hall and DK Metcalf in the queue. I'm hoping that one of them will slide to us. There is a lot of other options, but for me, they are the priority options here. If we could get one of those guys, Shawn adding Deebo Samuel and DeAndre Hopkins into the mix as well. We'll see what happens. But those 2 guys, Shawn, who you didn't add to the queue, is that just based on there's a lot of players in this range that you like ahead of them that you think are better values, or are they players that you just think are vastly overpriced at this point? Because I know they're both players that you really like their talent.
Breece Hall goes as the 27th overall pick. We have the 29th pick here. McCollum, now we're hoping that DK Metcalf makes it one more slot. That would allow us to address the wide receiver position. We really don't have any of those 4 running backs who have ADPs in between DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel. Those 4 guys would be Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, and Travis Etienne. But DK Metcalf does go there at pick 28. What are your thoughts here? I mean, the running backs after, like a Ramondre Stevenson, I think similarly as strong. Josh Jacobs coming off the season he had last year. Even though I've never been a Jacobs guy, he would probably be the player. Do you have any interest in taking a DeAndre Hopkins to get the...
I would rather have Samuel, but if you want to take Hopkins, as you have the controllers and we're running out of time, and I'm sure the listeners are all chuckling along as they've really enjoyed the way Shawn set that up for DeAndre Hopkins. I think Shawn, anyone listening in, give Shawn a round of applause the way he set that up as we got Hopkins. But Deebo Samuel would have been of interest. Out of the running backs, I would be interested in Derrick Henry. I just think that in terms of where he has been in terms of production, it seems like, when you're getting him at the 310 where he's just gone pick 34, I think is a very fair price. He did go behind Josh Jacobs, who you mentioned, Travis Etienne on one pick, then Justin Fields, then that's who went next. But there is a lot of wide receivers, Shawn, going in this range. The player, though, I probably would have went for there was Deebo, but Hopkins, still a lot of... this is the part of the conversation where when we go back to what we were talking about with Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, the veteran wide receivers, how things could slow down potentially for some of those guys. And then we have DeAndre Hopkins, who is going basically 3 full rounds after those guys. And I could see Hopkins putting up the same points as them. So I guess when we're taking him in that range, that's a positive more for Hopkins than it is a negative maybe for the other guys. But the one thing about Hopkins, I do have concerns about when players are missing time, they're getting older. Then obviously he missed time for the suspension, question marks around that. I start to wonder, is he, past that? He's definitely past the prime, but is he even further beyond that age cliff at this particular point in time? But adding him there at the pick 29 gives us Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, which again is a solid wide receiver room to kick things off. We have got nipped there a few times, Shawn. There was a few players that we thought we were probably in a more comfortable spot than we were, but overall, I think we're going in a nice direction here. We are moving into the middle of the 4th round now. Ramondre Stevenson went off the board, then Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, who is now obviously with the Chicago Bears, Najee Harris going off at the 4.3, which is probably where he should have been going last year when he was in that late 1st round for selections. We get Mike Williams, Christian Watson. We are 2 picks away now, Shawn. Top of our queue, we had Joe Burrow in there. He has gone off the board. The draft picking up a little bit of pace, which I'm happy to see at this point. We have Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Michael Pittman, Keenan Allen. You've mentioned a number of times about Keenan Allen being vastly underpriced. One player, Shawn, you don't have in here, and I do think we need to address wide receiver further at this point, but I do think TJ Hawkinson in this range is interesting at the tight end position. But yeah, we have some options, and second-year Drake London kind of piques my interest here. But how are you feeling? We're on the clock. Jerry Jeudy. Are the Broncos going to bounce back this year? And again, I mentioned the price for Najee Harris. This feels like where Pittman probably should have been going last year, but he may be sufficiently priced at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, I think you're getting a great price on Michael Pittman. You're getting a fantastic price on Jerry Jeudy. He seems like the clear-cut selection here. One of the reasons why I would have been okay with going with that second running back, getting a Breece Hall on top of an Austin Ekeler, is that I think that this range, this tier of wide receivers is undervalued relative to the guys going in rounds 2 and 3. Now, the problem that you have is that you only get 1 pick per round. So if the round 4 wide receivers are undervalued, but you can only draft one of them, that doesn't address all of your structural issues. And so you still have to be aware of the fact that you have to get enough wide receivers total. But you can draft a guy here. You can hope another player falls. We're probably going to get a good receiver at the 5.5. But Jahmyr Gibbs, also somebody where, I think his value at some point this offseason is going to absolutely explode. He, for me, is similar to where we were last year with Breece Hall. Breece Hall ended up being one of our very highest roster players. He then looked like he was going to be one of the 3 or 4 biggest winners of the entire 2022 season. Unfortunately, injuries got in the way, but if I have Gibbs at about the same level in terms of total roster percentage,
I was thinking that is a high mark there that we're setting for Gibbs here.
Yeah, I think it's hard not to be pretty happy with that. It's a little bit of an awkward level here price-wise, his ADP versus where we're going to draft at 53, but he does go at the 501. The drafter at the turn obviously is not going to get to pick for a long time, and so you maybe have to reach a little bit. One of the things that I would just throw out here in terms of mild tweaks for 2023, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail in later shows. We want to throw a few of these nuggets in from time to time as we're doing the draft shows. Is just I'm going to be a little bit more willing to reach in 2023 and play to my board, a little bit less concerned with getting ADP values. Again, we'll go into detail on why that is and how you're going to benefit from that deeper into the offseason. But Colm, Michael Pittman does not make it quite back to us. He goes at pick 50. We're up at pick 53. The top players on our board: Drake London, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jameson Williams, Chris Godwin, and then he who shall not be named at the tight end position. Who do you like out of these guys? We're one pick away.
We probably should take he who should not be named just for the pure fun of it. But Drake London's there. I'm interested in that. And George Pickens as well. The player I was going to pitch for was TJ Hawkins, and he went 2 picks earlier. I'm on board here, Shawn, if you want to go with that player that will not be named. But he may be there in the next round, but you've already made the pitch that you're happy to reach. I think Drake London's the pick here. And that is not the person. We'll let the listeners know who that player is when he is selected, and hopefully maybe for us in the next round. But yeah, Shawn, this isn't you just made the point, and I just want to reiterate it to the listeners. In this zone where we've mentioned a number of the wide receivers, somebody who wasn't on our board, 2 players actually who weren't really up for selection for us in this, Terry McLaurin and Christian Kirk, also in this range, who are both good NFL wide receivers. Kirk had a really solid season last year. But you are looking from kind of wide receiver 23, 24, all the way down to kind of wide receiver 36. There is a lot of options in this range. And Shawn just added a name to the queue, and Jahan Dotson, who is wide receiver 41, who I absolutely am all aboard this season. So there's a wide range of players in here: Jameson Williams, Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, George Pickens. Lots of options at the wide receiver position. So trying to get 2 to 3 of those guys, if you can, between rounds 4, 5, and 6 would be kind of the dream scenario, Shawn. But as we see, since we made our selection, I mentioned the pick of McLaurin, then it's Christian Kirk, it's Smith and Jigba, Jameson Williams, Tyler Lockett. That is the row. So when you get into this range too, there's obviously the wide receivers that we want to get, but there's also 11 other teams, as Chris Godwin goes off the board, who want them wide receivers. So Shawn mentioned about taking that step a little bit earlier. We mentioned the drafter in the 112 who is after going and getting Gibbs, probably a round to a half a round ahead of ADP, but isn't going to have the option if he doesn't take them at that point. You don't want to miss out on this range either. So there is going to be times, I think, even taking some of these guys a round ahead of ADP is going to be the smart play as well. George Pickens, Shawn, off the board. We are 5 selections away. The wide receivers are getting wiped out in a major way. Top of our board, though, Shawn, is he who shall not be named, and Marquise Brown, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, who I mentioned. So I would love to get 2 of those 6 names here in our next 2 picks. That can be hard when there's 12 selections between them and 5 picks before that. So 17 picks, Shawn. What's the chances that we get 2 of those, now 5, as he who shall not be named, Shawn, goes off the board? Let the listeners know who it is.
Well, Kyle Pitts had an ADP of 63. He goes exactly at 63 to one of the most experienced and successful drafters in this draft. I think that will end up being a significant bargain. I don't know if I would have wanted to add Kyle Pitts to a team here where we already have Drake London. There are some advantages to getting both guys. There are some advantages to splitting those players up and betting on the breakout for one or the other. Colm, as we run through here, Marquise Brown was fantastic in the first 5 weeks last season before he gets hurt. You're looking at a Kyler Murray injury limiting his upside, but if Hopkins is moved, the competition probably also dries up. He goes 2 picks ahead of us. DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, huge NFL talents, problems with their workloads, but we're now in round 6. So those problems are maybe less relevant than the talent. Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, the 2 receivers here, second-year players with the breakout. Who do you like?
I think we'll go Swift, unless you strongly want Dobbins.
So the little headline with Dobbins, the little headline with Swift, as you click on him there, is remains in Lions plans. So anybody who was worried that maybe DeAndre Swift wasn't in the Lions plans. The other thing is that for some reason DeAndre Swift was not in the Lions plans, then there are probably going to be, probably not 31, but like 27, 20 other teams. Like, he could be in the plans for us. So you have that signing. It's a good signing from a reality football perspective. They bring in David Montgomery, who can be a between the 20s pounder. He can be a goal line bruiser. He can be a receiving back. I mean, one of the things with David Montgomery that I think gets overlooked is that, yeah, he doesn't have the explosiveness, and we probably spent too much time before he was drafted telling people don't draft him in the top couple of spots in your dynasty leagues. He does not have the explosiveness to be a superstar. Now people are really shying away because he doesn't have that explosiveness, but what he does have is a 3-down profile. How do you like him compared to Jamal Williams as it relates to DeAndre Swift and what he is going to do as a fantasy player? You're like, I'm looking at Jahan Dotson and Treylon Burks. And
that's what I have.
Back around. We have 4 picks in the interim here. Burks does go at 72. That's right about ADP. Dotson still there. His ADP at about 80. We have pick 77.
We want Dotson. That is, we're counting down to Dotson. But back to Swift. I'm not a big David Montgomery supporter. That's no surprise to people listening. And that, I think he's pretty comparable to Jamal Williams overall. Being a Packers fan, I've seen what Williams could do before the Lions. Obviously, I didn't expect him to get in the end zone as much. He is a talented player, but I still think we haven't really seen the upside of what Swift can do fully on a consistent basis. And I do think that, a bit like you mentioned with Ekeler, who doesn't get all the work. I think maybe that's the profile. Again, linking him back to Ekeler, we've done that a few times this year. I think that's the way we probably want to see him used. I wouldn't be against Montgomery getting some of that earlier down work if that meant that Swift was going to get more of the third down stuff and keep him fresh. The problem last year for Swift was those long explosive runs that he had. When they happened, he tended to get tackled inside the 5 or inside the 10-yard line. Then they were punched in. So the other part with that is David Montgomery does go with the 702, and maybe it's just me. I don't think they should be anyway close in terms of ADP. If we were getting Montgomery in the 10th, 11th round, maybe then there's a play to do that. But if you're taking those two guys at pretty much the same ADP, I think we're clearly going and getting Swift each and every time. Jahan Dotson, Shawn, I'm not giving you any time. We're on the clock. There's 4 seconds left. I was filibustering talking about a completely different player that we've already taken. Jahan Dotson was the only option there.
Jahan Dotson does get to us. Not a huge surprise because his ADP was a little bit later, but you know that wide receivers can fly off the board a little bit early. We take him ahead of Kadarius Toney, the potential Chiefs breakout player in 2023, who had an ADP of around 73. We take him ahead of Gabe Davis, who in any kind of one-game setting, which if the team does as well as we hope, as well as we expect, does become very relevant because, that's the week that you win it all. Davis is a guy that you like there. He could have a 200-yard, 3-touchdown game at any time. He does go at pick 80. The Bills have just sent out so many signals at this point that they want to upgrade the wide receiver 2 spot that I am looking to move him in Dynasty. I think that he's a rough pick in Best Ball. And I'm a big Davis believer. I think that he still is going to have a very nice career, big picture. Colm, another guy who is coming off of injury, and we think about DeAndre Swift and how that impacted his 2022 in such a big way. That would be Rashad Bateman. I guess even with that being the case, I'm surprised that his ADP is at about 86. He has the ability to just absolutely blow the top off compared to everybody going in this particular range. And I think that if Lamar Jackson is there, which I guess I would still lean to, even with the news that, he obviously wants out. But if they go in a different direction, there are options. You mentioned how Devontae Adams in the previous show, Derek Carr, big season with. Jimmy G probably have a big season with. There are going to be some guys that the Ravens can go to and get competent enough quarterback play that if Rashad Bateman can just stay healthy, especially with the amount of just what his target share should be. I think this is the season that he is a league winner. So I hope that he falls a little bit more. We do have some time to wait here. Deshaun Watson goes 1 pick after Dak Prescott. That I think is interesting. Watson, purely from a fantasy perspective, has more value than Prescott. This will be the season where you do expect him to either turn it around or kind of work himself out of the NFL. Now, he can't work himself out of the NFL because the Cleveland Browns have given him.
They'll have to find a job for him,
that,
somewhere. I don't know if it's like serving fries. They're gonna have to get money back for that contract some way.
Yeah, well, my family members are always talking about Madison Bumgarner here with the Arizona Diamondbacks and how they just need to put him on the ground staff. And like, I don't think that that's the way you can really make that contract work. But a similar dynamic there, where some of these guaranteed contracts can be a little bit of an issue. Colm, we're one pick away. Rashad Bateman does have the top ADP. We need the drafter here to pass. If he does pass,
I think we have two options here. We do have Bateman. We also have Tua as an option at quarterback, but I would rather get the Bateman option. Reports seem to be pretty positive with him as well in terms of, should be back. We have the option of both. So I think we go Bateman here, who seems like he should be back, active in his, preseason, I guess we'll say, routine in terms of getting back to 100%. And there's no real concerns of him as we get ready to enter the season. The tagline that comes up here is continues to progress. Shawn, I think with the Ravens at the moment, with Lamar Jackson, the contract situation, and him asking for the trade and so on and so forth, I think it's deflated all the ADPs of the Ravens players. We talked earlier about J.K. Dobbins, and I think the similar with Lamar Jackson. Funny enough, with Bateman, if Jackson left and they did have a different quarterback, sometimes not having a mobile quarterback might be better for the wide receiver. For the Baltimore Ravens, the best quarterback they can have is Lamar Jackson. I think they should be doing all they can to keep him there. But I think Bateman is somebody here at the pick 92, the 808, who is vastly undervalued. You're also looking at Courtland Sutton, who I think could be interesting as a bounce back. I just haven't set my full range of expectations on what's going to happen with the Broncos this year. I do have a feeling that it's going to all work out for them, and it's going to work out for Russell Wilson this year, who's just had a knee procedure recently, should be back 100%. But Adam Thielen goes on the next pick. And again, when we're doing these 1v1s, I would much rather have Bateman versus Adam Thielen. Tua does go with the 8-10, that's pick 94, then Alvin Kamara. So we don't get him, but we do have a lot of other quarterback options that Shawn is adding into the queue. But just to do a quick recap off the team, Shawn, it's Austin Ekeler, it's DeAndre Swift, it's Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Jahan Dotson, Rashad Bateman. No tight end at this particular point in time, but no quarterbacks, no tight ends. But I think the wide receivers, running backs is quite enjoyable after 8 selections so far. How are you feeling, Shawn, as we move through it? Adding some of the tight end options to the queue, and Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Pat Fairmouth, Chiggs Okonkwo. There's some of these second-year options, Shawn. You're after adding Dulcich to the queue that I'm very interested in. Trey McBride also adding him in there. So I think it's going to be interesting again as I like getting into these situations where we're rounding these teams out and trying to fill it in. And we're 2 picks away, Shawn. No surprise to the listeners. Guess who is the top quarterback Shawn has added to the queue here? It is Daniel Jones. How are we feeling here as things set up? Elijah Moore, top of our queue. Then Daniel Jones has just gone off the board. So I was going to ask Shawn, how is he feeling? He's obviously feeling despair after that has happened. We are on the clock. Who are we going with here, Shawn? I'll leave it up to you at this point.
No, we have a lot of options at QB. Daniel Jones would have been a guy who gave us that rush hybrid element that we discussed in the last show as being a player that you could pick and then pair him with some lower end pass oriented QBs. Colm, you okay with James Cook at this selection?
I seen you didn't have him starred, but I thought he was very interesting based on how things are setting up here with ADP. So that's the 905, pick 101. We're into the triple digit selections now, but adding as a third running back for the Buffalo Bills on the roster, I think feels appropriate. Sometimes prices just feel correct. Ezekiel Elliott, the running back, off the board just before that. Then we get Kirk Cousins. There's a lot of options, Shawn, here at quarterback. And if we look through the options that are in the queue, just to give some reference to people listening in, we have Trey Lance, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. And I don't know, Shawn, if you agree on this. I think that you're going to, for people wondering, Sam Howell is in the queue as well, but he's QB 29. Kyler Murray feels, Shawn, like the most undervalued quarterback by ADP this year. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Again, I think it depends on if you're playing against 11 other players, or if you're playing in a huge tournament. And if you're playing in a huge tournament where you're going to be in a 3 QB build, and with the pre-NFL draft versions of these Underdog contests, they're 20-round drafts. Those extra 2 roster spots do give you a little bit more flexibility to go 3 QB, because when you're talking about rounds 19 and 20, you don't necessarily have a great sense of which players at those prices are going to be able to get any shot at volume. Now, we're going to take some guys we like at those spots, so don't think we're just going to throw those picks away. But when we're looking at this from a big picture perspective, because of who we have, and drafters are always asking, what do you think about the stacking? What do you think about the correlations? If you can get that element to work inexpensively, or in a way that allows you to do some other things that you want to do anyway, then obviously you strongly recommend it. One of the things as you look at this particular team is that we really wanted Tua because we have Tyreek Hill, but we had a player we felt like was a must draft at that spot. We took him. Tua did not come back to us. Again, I prefer to take that player as opposed to force the QB element there, in part because we had Jerry Jeudy on this team, and Russell Wilson could be a bounce back guy with Sean Payton. We have Drake London on this team. We have Jahan Dotson on this team. And when you look at the inexpensive ways to play this, where you have a run pass element at the QB position, I think that you have to really like the additions of Jacoby Brissett and Taylor Heineke as it relates to where those young QBs are. Now, a team is going to try and create as much flexibility as it can. That doesn't mean that they won't go out in the draft, especially if the right players fall to them, and add a guy to jump a Sam Howell. And yet at the same time, I like those offenses as really inexpensive ways to play this. We're trying to create as many pathways as possible. We're trying to create as much total value as possible, especially this early in the offseason. I mean, you can build some teams where people are going to look back and say, how did you ever have the ability to draft those guys? Well, in order to do that, you have to draft some players you think are going to be big-time risers. So that's kind of where we are from that perspective. Colm, Blair has a great article out on the site on Jalen Hyatt. We think that he's probably going to be, or at least right now, is a little bit undervalued. I think he's going to be someone who screams up the board after the NFL draft. Are you comfortable taking him here?
Let's go. Yeah, I'm always comfortable with getting these rookies because, as we've talked about on the show, and maybe with some people, maybe new listeners this year, but the rookie value at this particular point, generally the players are going to see the biggest jump in ADP based on landing spot. We've been through the testing process at this point, but adding those rookies in is something that I think is always positive to try and do where we can. And we got to a little bit of a flat zone there too, Shawn, when we're looking at potential players in terms of non-rookies that I would have been probably looking to select. There is a number of running backs in that range, but non-running backs, you're probably looking into the tight end position and Dalton Schultz. Then you're into a lot of the quarterback options. And with the quarterback options, as I mentioned, there is still a lot of them there for us. Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, Matthew Stafford, Sam Howell. So lots of options there available to us. Jared Goff did just go off the board at the 10-11. Zay Jones went at the 10-09. Tyler Boyd 10-10. So I do think that when you have a lot of quarterback options like that, it makes it a little bit easier to let things slide a little bit further. But we now stand at 3 running backs, 7 wide receivers, no tight ends, no quarterbacks. We love to do things, Shawn, that are not the conventional way to do things. So we'll see how we round this out. We also love those. You either get the quarterbacks in the window, Shawn, or you get the quarterbacks who are kind of at the back door of the draft. It can be a way to look at it too. But we are set up here 2 selections away. By ADP, we have Geno Smith, Alexander Mattison are the top options. By ADP, then Russell Wilson, Dalton Schultz. I'm kind of interested in adding Schultz here if he makes it back to us. How do you feel about him at this point as he does actually make it back?
I would be okay with Schultz. I think that his opportunity is still significant. I think they're going to draft a young, fun QB who needs someone specifically to throw to, needs a little bit of outlet potentially. I think that Schultz, a little more talented maybe than people are giving him credit for, not just a product of that Dallas offense. Is that your preference here?
Yeah, that is. And when we look at the options that are available then at tight end, Cole Kmet, Chiggs Okonkwo I mentioned, then you've got Greg Dulcich, Mike Gesicki, Trey McBride, and Dalton Kincaid. And when you're looking at those, I like, obviously it's changing teams, which is something that's not preferential, but you get him, and I think then you're into probably a 3 tight end build. And if you can get 2 of those guys, either entering their rookie or second year, or even a Kmet who is now technically turning into an NFL veteran, I think that's a nice way to play it. To have Schultz there as a security blanket at the tight end position. But we did talk about him on a recent show, and his production over the last 3 seasons has been very, very strong for the Cowboys. And although Houston, aren't going to be a juggernaut this year, I do think that they will also rely on him with, for example, Brandon Cooks now no longer being with the team. It's going to free up more targets, and I think Schultz is in a good spot. The next tight end that did go was Kmet. We were in a zone there where we got Madison, Brian Robinson, Kenneth Gainwell all went off the board just before Kmet, then Donovan Peoples-Jones. 9 picks again to us, Shawn, so we have a little bit of time to wait. How are you feeling about the team overall now that we've added that tight end? We're probably going to hold off a little bit. Any players that you feel like we have to make a grab for here to make sure we get on our roster in this kind of 12th round range?
No, not necessarily. I love what we've done in terms of creating the foundation and the upside at both wide receiver and running back. Obviously, that means we're going to be weaker at quarterback and tight end. And so you want to make sure you have the right contingency-based plays to create both a little bit of a floor, quite a bit of upside, and the right mix with the other players you've drafted. I like the possibility of adding late at the running back position rookies who could jump. A Spears could really jump. A Tucker could jump. Miller, Evans, Dwayne McBride could jump. Chase Brown could jump. All of those guys could be big, big risers, so we want to feather them into the roster late. I still really think Trey McBride is going to have a fantastic NFL career, and the target competition in 2023 could be pretty limited there in Arizona. Dalton Kincaid could be the top rookie tight end. Mike Gesicki, his price is held down not only by his own performance, but by the fact that the last 2 big free agent signings at tight end for the New England Patriots were both busts, but I think he still has immense upside if you believe in Mac Jones at all. The question I think here is Russell Wilson. He's going to be below his ADP. He's less interesting, I think, to other drafters because we have Jerry Jeudy, which is really the main guy to go with him. Colm, I was going to ask you, do you like him there? But he does go at pick 138. We're now on the clock at 140. Kyler Murray also gone. What direction do you like here?
I'm good with either going with Dulcich at tight end or Wendell Robinson at wide receiver. Anyone else you have a preference for out of those 2 guys? Outside of those, or?
Let's go with Dulcich. He's someone who could be the huge breakout guy here. We know that he was a favorite of the previous coaching staff. They had really prioritized him in the draft. He was the player they really wanted to build their offense around, as mildly absurd as that sounds. He flashed in a big way middle of the season. He had injuries down the stretch, so wasn't able to finish on the high note that probably would have lifted him even higher. And then you have the change in coaching staff. You get a new situation where the coaching staff doesn't have those same previous connections to him. But when you think about what Sean Payton was able to accomplish with Jimmy Graham there with the New Orleans Saints, now that's not to say that Greg Dulcich is Jimmy Graham, but I don't think that we're going to be shying away from Dulcich because of the coach. This could be a real catalyst for that breakout. So I'm fine with that pick, especially as we're trying to create upside at that position late. Colm, one of the interesting things here, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, they are both available. I've mentioned on several occasions that I think that there is risk and downside if you're drafting them really early in Dynasty. And yet when we're talking about this late in redraft, when you need QBs, they become kind of interesting. Young does go at 145. Stroud still available. Jordan Love available. I think an interesting pick this late. Matthew Stafford, kind of that safe guy. And then Howell and Ritter, both players that we'll try and wait on and hopefully not wait too late. What are your thoughts of this pick?
Yeah, I think I'm good with quarterback here if you want to go that way. And I'm interested in either Stroud or Love. Probably going with Love though for. Again, I was going to say for the security of a starting role this year, but we're still lingering on Shawn. Feels like we'll be lingering on at week 1 with the Aaron Rodgers situation. But yeah, Jordan Love. And again, drafting at this point of the year, there's a $3 draft, as we've mentioned a few times. You get Jordan Love at this point going at the 149th pick, 1305. And I think obviously there is a price in enough. Aaron Rodgers likely not being there in Green Bay, which leads to Love being the starter. But I also think that when that is confirmed and Love then is the clear starter for Green Bay, I think he is moving up the draft board a little bit here. Shawn, do you think we see him kind of in that 11th round range, or do you think he is staying in the 13th round range even when Rodgers is moved or retires or whatever happens at the end of this never-ending saga?
Yeah, I think the assumption here is that he's the starter. And so I think that the price isn't going to move a lot until we start to get rave reviews of him in the offseason. One of the things that really was encouraging in terms of Romeo Doubs last training camp and then into the preseason was the connection between those two guys in preseason games was extremely impressive. You have Christian Watson there, who is even more dynamic than Doubs. I think that there, are concerns from people. You have an unproven quarterback and you have unproven wide receivers. And that's why you get that kind of price. The thing that you would love to see would be for Love to use some of his athleticism and add some rushing yards. But I think that this offense is going to be more dynamic than people expect. You obviously have 2 running backs as well who can take screen passes and go 30, 40 yards with them, can add receiving touchdowns with them. Even though we don't have either of those 2 players, and Doubs does just go at the 155. So Doubs goes ahead of players like Rashid Shaheed, Rondell Moore, Isaiah Hodgins, Hunter Renfrow, Nico Collins. That part, arguably a little bit interesting, but it is one of the reasons why we took so many receivers early. This group of receivers outside of Rondell Moore, not compelling at all. Colm, as we move through round 14 here, the 13-14 turn was Valdez-Scantling and Hodgins. Both of those guys, interesting reality players. MVS, if he kind of remains in the current situation with Kansas City, he's going to have at least 1 or 2 blow-up games. Isaiah Hodgins, one of those guys that our prospect analysis rated him much more highly than what the NFL did. Coming out of college, he's now paying that off. At the same time, I think that when it's all said and done, the receiving group with the Giants, it's not going to be elite, but it's going to be crowded. And so I don't know about the overall volume there, even though love the player. Again, that's one of the reasons why we built the team around those wide receivers early. As it heads back for our pick, Stroud is still out there, and so we could add him on in addition. Rondell Moore, somebody we'd have to consider here. Jeff Wilson, after re-signing with the Miami Dolphins, when we're talking about round 14, he's going to have some big games. He could be the tournament winner. We have 2 tight ends now. We're going to add a third, but we could probably afford to press it a little bit on Gesicki, McBride, and Kincaid. A lot of opportunities here, a lot of options. What direction do you like?
Yeah, Wilson goes off the board, so he's gone, but Rondell Moore's an option. But quarterback, I think Stroud's an option. I think we could hold off potentially and get Ritter or Howell as well. So I'm good with Moore or quarterback. I probably lean Moore unless you want to go with Stroud.
Okay, so we will take Rondell Moore there. I just
looking around the boards, I think a lot of the teams here are at 2 quarterbacks now at this point. Team drafting here at the 14-11 has 1 quarterback, so I think we could see them potentially add one of these 2 guys. But by ADP, I think it probably will slide back around. I'd be hoping that we get one of them. He does add Jimmy Garoppolo, actually, who wasn't one of the 2 targets that we had in here. The other quarterback that went shot in this range that I'm interested in, who wasn't in our queue, is Kenny Pickett. Obviously, we like both of his wide receivers. He has Pat Freiermuth there as well. Interested in Pickett, or do you think the ADP here is just a little bit too sharp for him? I think it's when we're into the range where Jimmy Garoppolo is going, for example, I think that he's interesting, and he's somebody I would prefer to take for the potential upside over somebody like Matthew Stafford, who's going in that same range.
Yeah, Pickett is a great selection. He's probably the person that we should have considered at our pick. He's a little bit more interesting when he falls to you after
he did go at the 1405, so he just was gone just before that last selection. Yeah,
right. But when we took Love there, so the question, I think, are you mostly exclusively taking Pickett when you have drafted Deontay Johnson, Freiermuth, or certainly George Pickens? You'd be looking at him. Colm, you have the rookie tight end still available here. Gesicki probably not going to come back around to us. We have so many of those rookie running backs. They're basically all still available, so not really creating an issue for us in terms of being able to get one of those guys. We're back on the clock. It's round 15. Who do you like here?
Do we want to seal up the tight end position, or do we want to make sure we get I don't think we need to get Sam Howell here because we obviously have a stacking option with Ritter, but probably clean up here at the tight end position maybe. Shawn's overruled me.
Well, let's take Spears and see if he ends up being one of these huge risers post-draft. One of the reasons why I wanted to kind of create additional value, and I say that Spears was also someone who was well below his current ADP, and not only is below the current ADP, but someone who could, I think, jump 2-3 rounds after the NFL draft. One of the trendy types of players where you could really see how that would lend itself or end up in being selected much earlier in the reality draft than I think current perception indicates. We'll have more of that on the site and in some future shows. But Colm, I guess for me, the fact that Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid both still out there, and I think that Kincaid actually might be the league winner for us. With that being the case, and with us already having two tight ends, I didn't necessarily want us to get boxed in to, or boxed out of taking McBride or Kincaid if they end up just falling so perfectly, especially in a 3 tight end build. Those guys, more uncertainty, and yet, Mike Gesicki, and this isn't to say I'm selling him, I'm buying Mike Gesicki, and yet when you're looking at those 3 guys side by side, Gesicki has had a lot of opportunities to prove himself at the NFL level and just hasn't really quite done it.
I like Gesicki, but I would rather at ADPs have those 2 guys ahead of him. So I would be flipping the ADPs, and I would be going with McBride, then Kincaid, and then Gesicki. But we'll see how it goes. We are 6 picks away. Tyquan Thornton, Shawn, goes off the board, who is somebody I like to get if you're looking for wide receiver in this range. But it feels like these next 2 selections, Shawn, were probably, I think here, in terms of ADP, how things sit, McBride is 185, Kincaid is 196. We are at pick 183 at the moment. We'll be picking at 188. So they are both definitely in play. Sam Howell then is 209 by ADP. Desmond Ritter's 222 by ADP. So I feel like in the next 2 picks there, possible options. Obviously, there is other running back options that you've added into the queue here. Sean Tucker, for example. Mac Jones is a quarterback option who goes in this range as well. I would still prefer the other 2 options probably over Mac Jones that I talked about there, and Howell and Ritter. But 3 selections away. Who's your dream pick here out of these guys? And Shawn, you've talked about Chuba Hubbard as well a couple of times. I see his name creeping up the board here.
Yeah, he's one of these guys where we're hoping that maybe we can use him to fill out rounds 19 and 20. We have 5 picks remaining. That's ambitious.
His ADP is like 15 picks away. I love Shawn waiting for round 20 for these guys.
Yeah, they when you're in this range, those guys can obviously fall. But we have 5 picks left, and we know that 2 of them are going to be quarterbacks, 1 of them are going to be tight ends. So those 3 picks are taken. We're going to have 2 additional picks. We need more running back depth. Those picks will probably be running backs, just to give us a sense of where we are from a big picture perspective. Colm, we're up at 188. Both McBride and Kincaid are there. I overruled you the last time. Who do you want at the tight end position?
So Shawn says that Kincaid could be the league winner for this team. Then he says it's my option as to which one we pick. If we're going, Shawn, you have the control. I would pick McBride. You pick Kincaid. You do which one you want to do.
We're going to take Trey McBride. He is our favorite tight end. And
I guilted him into it.
That favoritism, didn't really help us through the vast majority of the 2022 season. And then in week 17, we're in the Superflex tournament playoffs over at the FFPC. Our top 5 round guys don't score for a variety of reasons. Derrick Henry taking the week off. You have T. Higgins not playing due to the sad story there. The rest of our guys injured. Well, Justin Jefferson not injured. He just doesn't score any points, so he doesn't get in the starting lineup for us. But we finish in the middle of the pack, 16th out of 33 because of Trey McBride. I mean, that means we got to take Trey McBride on every team this year, doesn't it?
Probably not every team, but Shawn, if people remember back to this time last year, Trey McBride and Greg Dulcich were they were almost on every team that I had last year in terms of my draft. So I think they'll feature on a lot, and I think entering their second year, we've seen glimpses, flashes, I guess we'll say, from both of those guys, and I think Dulcich could be something potentially special here at over the next 5 years as a tight end. But I really do like Trey McBride, and I think we've rounded out a very nice tight end core with who we have there. I was okay, Shawn, if you overrid me again there, but yeah, like to have Trey McBride in there. So these are the moments that I fear when this team advances to the final of this contest, and Trey McBride lets us down in the last week. I think we'll be hearing that on a podcast next year. But we are one pick away, Shawn. Sam Howell's there, Ritter's there. Feels like a good time to take either one of those and then round things out. The other player who is there is Chuba Hubbard. Kendry Miller's there, Zach Evans at running back. So we could push quarterback one more round here if we really want to. And I'm up with the risk if you're up, but you're on the clock.
Yeah, I don't think we want to risk there being another Sam Howell true believer in this draft. Again, when we talk about this, and we joke from time to time about the Sam Howell 100% roster club.
We don't joke, Shawn. We live it. It's a motto. It's a life motto.
It's a life philosophy. Yeah,
we love it.
I think it is a life philosophy, and we'll see if that life philosophy is a successful life philosophy or,
something we regret.
Well, there is the potential for that to be a cardboard box philosophy.
Yeah.
As we get down the stretch in 2023, there is risk with it. There's huge reward. You're going to miss on some of these. Obviously, you're not going out there and drafting every single team with 3 quarterbacks and one of them being Sam Howell as you play your fantasy leagues. Don't do that every time. When
one question on
you
Howell,
have a Jahan Dotson, do it occasionally.
Yeah, and to pair them up, I think is a perfect time to push and get him a little bit earlier as well. But we got him right around ADP in this selection. But question, obviously, when it pops up there is may have to compete with Jacoby Brissett now with the Washington Commanders. They have shuffled out both Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz from last year. So do you think there's a legitimate competition there? I think it's a case that Sam Howell gets the first crack here, and unless things mess up, that he is the starting quarterback here throughout the season. Is that the way you see it, or do you think they might try and ease him in behind a veteran at the start of this year? I think him getting some action at the end of last season is a clear picture to them wanting to give him the opportunity at the start of this year. And with them, I'm going to say only adding to Brissett. I think Jacoby Brissett is better than both quarterbacks they had last season. So I think they have really done a nice job in what they've done replacing those 2 quarterbacks. Do you think there's a legitimate competition there, or do you think we're getting, and there is only one right answer to this question, Shawn, as well. Is it just Sam Howell's job?
No, I mean, I think it's a legitimate competition. I think what you said too about Jacoby Brissett being better than the guys they had last year, I think that's true.
As an actual NFL quarterback, I think he's probably the most underrated out of the them kind of veteran rosters when you're looking in between 25 and 35 of the best quarterbacks. I think he's always the one that gets forgotten about.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that there was so much disappointment with Deshaun Watson last season is that people didn't really give Brissett credit for just how well he played. He was fantastic. And the elevation that you got for Amari Cooper there was unreal. He had a great season. He could come in there and start for Washington. I mean, he's one of the best 32 QBs in the NFL. And, if everything were perfectly efficient, then, you would have him starting for one of the teams. we're making the bet that Sam Howell was just dramatically undervalued, should have been a top 10 pick in the reality draft last season. His teammates have said those kinds of things about him. And if that's the case, he will win the job. He has the upside to make it worth the pick there, whereas Brissett probably doesn't. That's the gamble. But it's definitely not a lock. I mean, I think it is a real competition. Colm, we're on the clock here. Chase Brown, Jerome Ford, Dwayne McBride, really interesting running back picks. We have 10 seconds.
Are we passing on Ritter then? With 4 seconds, you make the selection.
So Colm wants to make sure we get Ritter, which I'm okay with. That's at the 212. There is a chance that we would lose him if you passed. You have the.
I think there's a very strong chance we would have lost him there. He's about 10 picks ahead of ADP at that selection at the 212. But when we look around the board, there's quite a few teams with 2 quarterback builds that will be picking between that selection and when it comes back. So Baker Mayfield was off the board 1 selection after, Ryan Tannehill's after going off the board 3 selections later. I do think that quarterback will get what I got hoovered up there. So that's why I thought of it. I also tend to think when there's a situation where now we are 5 picks away from our next pick, the 3 running backs that we mentioned are kind of in a zone where I think that they could potentially all get back to us. So that elevated them up. Is there one of those 3 names, Shawn, that you have a preference on? I always defer to Shawn on the rookies. He is much more involved in the rookie side of things. Is there one of those guys that you have clearly over the other 2?
Well, Jerome Ford was probably an undervalued prospect last season, and he came out and he flashed with the Browns to the point where, I mean, they've been talking him up, and he does look like he'll be, or at least has a great shot to be, the direct backup to Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, if he's healthy, obviously going to play a lot. They have tried to rest him at times, but again, in part because they had elite backups. Ford is someone who, again, when you're talking about in the 19th round, you look at the strength of that offense, the offensive line. It seems to be a no-brainer, I think, at this selection.
Okay, so McBride did go. We have the option of Ford and Shawn takes him. We also had the option of Chase Brown. So that worked out well for us to go the quarterback to get the running back after that. At this point in time, Shawn, in terms of how things are sitting out, we have 3 quarterbacks at this point. Then we have Austin Ekeler, DeAndre Swift, James Cook, Tyjae Spears, Jerome Ford. Then it's Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Jahan Dotson, Rashad Bateman, Jalen Hyatt, and then Rondell Moore. And a tight end with 1 selection left to go. We have Dalton Schultz, Greg Dulcich, and Trey McBride. Shawn, that team for me is it is obviously people will look at it and probably say that quarterback is the weakness of it. And again, we are higher on these quarterbacks, I think, than a lot of consensus. But I really do like to have the 3 of those paired together. Running backs looking strong. The wide receivers, as we run through it, we have a lot of young wide receivers in that, as well as I know we mentioned the veterans that we do have in there in Hill and Hopkins, but even Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Jahan Dotson, Bateman in there. We get the rookie and Hyatt and Rondell Moore, who feels still like an extremely young player, but is in the NFL now, 3rd season, I believe we're entering at this particular point. But 1 pick left to go, Shawn. I think this team is looking pretty good, and I think we rounded out potentially here with 1 more running back. And I do see that I don't know if this is just for my entertainment purposes or not, but Ronald Jones is in the queue here, now a Dallas Cowboy. You will not believe, Shawn, how many DMs I got when Ronald Jones signed with the Cowboys. Is that it is kind of the I think it's out of Dumb and Dumber, is it? Where Jim Carrey says, "So you're saying there's a chance?" It feels kind of like that. Anytime anything happens with Ronald Jones, that is what people want to tell me.
Yeah, well, you also have the element there of the definition of insanity. But
definitely, yeah.
Mostly what we're looking at with Ronald Jones is a really strong karma selection. Anytime you have Ronald Jones on your team, you know that team is going to outperform even if he scores 0 points, which is what we got from him last season. The other part there, Colm, is we do know that he's better than Ezekiel Elliott. And so when Tony Pollard does need a breather, I say that. I mean, Ronald Jones has his work cut out for him to win a roster spot to win the second string position. He's in this group
Shawn, in
now.
the 20th round. In the 20th round, I think we would be obliged, I think.
We'd be obliged. Well, there are still some quarterbacks that you could take. You could go with a 4 QB build here. You can take Levis. You can take Purdy. I think that is interesting, more interesting than a pure throwaway pick. And that's probably what we're looking at the running back position. There are some interesting guys here. Joshua Kelly, with some of the ways that the Chargers have been talking. Zamir White in a second season probably puts himself in a better position to be the guy if you have an injury. So sometimes those players come out, don't have great rookie seasons. The starter is fantastic, and it's easy to then just completely lose the fact that players do get hurt. And the best sort of handcuff selections are often the cheapest ones that people have forgotten about because they didn't play out last season. I mentioned that with the quarterbacks. Levis goes 20.3, Purdy 20.4. Neither one of those players make it back to us at the end of the 20th round. So in some ways,
wheels up for Ronald Jones. We have liftoff. We're one pick away, Shawn. I was going to make a joke that I hope both quarterbacks got drafted before it came back to us. And now I see Shawn has even moved Zamir White ahead of Ronald Jones in the queue. So I'm hoping that Zamir White is the next pick here before it gets to us. And now Shawn has moved multiple players ahead of him in the queue. We are on the clock, Shawn. Joshua Kelly did go. You have control. I'm not going to get my hopes up here. You can do as you wish. And also just to note, Daniel Bellinger, really disappointing to see Darren Waller come into town with Daniel Bellinger, who I thought had a solid rookie year as well. Who are we going with, Shawn? 7 seconds left.
Well, let's stick with the rookie thesis and take an Evan Hull, another player who, I mean, if he hits in the right spot, you're going to have.
He could land in Dallas. Ronald Jones could get cut because of him.
So you have that huge upside there. He's another interesting guy. If you're looking at the RotoViz rookie guide, you want to pull him up, see where he's ranked, see where he went in the various mock drafts. We did 3 mock drafts that were super flex. We did 3 mock drafts that were regular. So we have you covered for whatever your format is. 2 other names who didn't really fit this build at this point, but were interesting players when you're talking about rounds 19 and 20, guys that I had a little bit higher in the rankings than they were drafted in our mock drafts. Players I think you're going to want to keep your eye on to see if the NFL agrees on their athleticism and what they accomplished down the stretch of their collegiate careers. Trey Palmer, Tyler Scott, give those guys a look. Receivers who don't go early are unlikely to make the big impact that you need in best ball leagues. Blair has some great research on that and how you want to build, who you want to select late. But those are a couple of other names that are going to feature in content on the site over this next month. Some guys who will be on the podcast, some guys who, last season when we were doing some of our shows during the draft, and Romeo Dobbs was the guy that we talked about at extreme length and we're excited about. And then he goes out, has a good offseason, has a good training camp, and then mixed results, I think is the fair way to put it as a rookie. A lot of misconnections with Aaron Rodgers, but someone who became very, very relevant, wasn't a big name at this time last season. There are some guys there late in the draft that we just did. Think about rounds 19, round 20. We mentioned you don't want to throw those picks away. You want to construct your roster in a way that you could get big value out of them. Because it was a 20-round draft, I gave us some more flexibility to go with both 3 QBs and 3 tight ends. That's a lot more difficult in the 18-round format that we're going to see with Best Ball Mania once that starts up. Colm, this is a team that was a lot of fun. It's a team where I like the structure. It's also a team that has extreme upside, and that upside is what we're looking for to win a tournament. And so much of it does boil down to Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder. Are those guys the starters? And the reason that we are looking at them is that if they do start, their fantasy profiles are what you're looking at. There are some guys who are safer but don't have the league-winning upside, don't really have a fantasy profile that works for you even if they're playing. And so that is the choice. If you can get a guy late, there's sort of a binary outcome where if he hits big. If he misses, then that particular team is busted. But at the $3 level, you want to take some of those shots. I had a lot of fun with this. Colm, what's your recap here? How are you feeling about this team now that it's all said and done?
I really like this. And what I am going to say, Shawn, is we're going to save that as a little bit of a teaser, because I do think that because it's a 20-round draft, because we went through it as we did, I think we'll do a full breakdown of this team on one of our upcoming shows, probably next week. But I think rather than rapid fire through it in a 2-minute, I think we'll dive into it, because I think there's a lot of players in here as well that we haven't talked a huge amount about. And when we were going through it, we were kind of dipping in. But players like DeAndre Hopkins, for example, talked about DeAndre Swift as well, and how close he is to David Montgomery in terms of ADP. Then the quarterbacks as well. I think we can dive into it a little bit more. Bateman, we didn't talk a huge amount about James Cook. So I think we can talk through that as well. I really like this team. I mentioned sometimes with drafts, there's certain points of the draft where maybe you're like, this team isn't falling exactly the way that I would like it to. But today, outside of 1 or 2 picks, we had multiple options at every single pick. I thought ADP played with us today, and it worked out in this draft room, helped us out getting some of the selections that we really wanted to nail down. So I'm very happy with this team, Shawn. But this is one I think we will dive into in a little bit more detail, look at some of those 1v1s and 2v2s based on ADP and how things played out. But really like this team. As we get ready to wrap up today's show, I want to give a reminder that you can get a RotoViz NFL pass and get a 10% discount off said NFL pass with the code RVRadio2023 at checkout. Gets you access to all the tools, all the content up on rotoviz.com. Fantastic work from the team up there every day on the website. I would highly recommend checking that out. Of course, you can check out Shawn's work up there as well. We will have another RotoViz Overtime podcast to come later this week. We'll be dropping Friday. We will see how the scheduling falls. At the moment, it might be Monday afternoon Eastern time, then Wednesday, then Friday. We'll see how it goes from week to week, but we're aiming for those 3 shows if we can get them out for you as the offseason progresses. We are not going to be far away from the NFL draft popping up. We are going to have some guests on to talk about the prospects. We'll have some on after the draft as well. So looking forward to some 3-man podcasts as well as we move forward here. But that was a hell of a draft, Shawn. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was a good time. Hopefully the listeners enjoyed. Hopefully you're out there drafting yourself. Remember to use the coupon code RotoViz when you sign up over at Underdog. Get yourself that 100% deposit match up to $100. We'll be back soon with more. This was so much fun.
Yeah, really, really fun. So we will be back with that additional show on Friday. As I mentioned as well, it may change from week to week, but subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed. Get every show once it is released as soon as you can get it. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host, as always, is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.